look, you know, it's sort of, see, I keep referring back to Sydney, but you know, I lived there for 20 something years. Yes, and it is much bigger, right? Just numerically much bigger. There's more geographically concentrated areas where if you go to Oxford Street or if you go to Newtown now, you know you're in a real gay-friendly area, right? You know, Perth had that a bit, like with Northbridge and so on, but it's much more recent, 1980s, 1990s. And as you mentioned before, you know, the criminalisation was only ended in 1991. And even then, you know, that affects people has like a really long tail of how that affects people. And in that year, 1991, I was the guild president at UWA. And so we had like a gay group, right? And we'd had one before then, but it was very sort of quiet, you know. But so in that year, it was reformed and we made it a formal department of the student guild. But the sort of the interesting point was there was a whole lot of discussion about what it was going to be called, right, about the name. And in the when sodomy was decriminalised in Western Australia, there was all these other offences came in, you know, and there was ones about proselytising, and nobody really knew what proselytising meant, other than that everyone was fearful that would mean if you were talking to someone, even seen talking to someone, and I have a feeling the age was 21, who was under that age, that would be proselytising and you could be arrested for that. And so this is a fear factor rather than a thing that actually unfolded. So in the name of that department, it became the homosexual, lesbian and bisexual students department. And it was because the gay men were fearful that if they called it gay, that would mean they were proselytizing and the police would be harassing us all the time. So it's just an indication of how long, you know, the effect of those sorts of laws and how much they can last even after they're no longer around, and how it affects people's mentality and how they see themselves, and therefore where you would meet with people and where people would congregate and what they would call that. You know, that was fear that people were feeling. That's why they thought they had to use this word homosexual, this like clinical, medical sort of word. That's what it said in the law. So that would be, you know, like the safest option, right? You weren't proselytizing if you're using this sort of legal word. And, you know, and when you look back now, you think, wow, you know, we really worked ourselves up into a huge, you know, misunderstanding about something. But that's what fear does, though. And that's what, and, you know, see then, you know, I was 32 or something. Most of those men then were younger than me. But so all of our lives, you know, that had always been illegal. We always had to watch out for the cops. You always had to watch out for entrapment. Whenever you went to somewhere, even to like connections, you always had to know where was the back door, where was the way you could get out quick, where were all the laneways and the alleyways you could escape down in a hurry, right? And people couldn't find you. And that, I believe that stays with you for life.
Connections, like nightclub, is like, I think it's one of the oldest clubs in Australia or something, and opened pre-legality. It's like 1975. So how did that how did that come about? How did that work? How were there not like police raids all the time?
Well, I think there were sometimes, but
were there police raids?
The thing to understand with that, I think the key to understand why could that happen then and survive, is really to understand the nature of, you know, what is now called Northbridge at that time. And so that, you know, the police had the containment policy. So all these sort of vices were contained in this one area. So, you know, that's where the brothels were. That's where Connections was, and pubs where you might meet other gay men who weren't at Connections. That's where you would find them around about there. That's where all the criminal sort of gangster types were. But I think that's the context to understand, right? You know, it was just a vice to the police, if you got arrested by the police, then you were generally arrested by the vice squad. But that's the context to understand, I think, why connections could open then and stay open.
Just because I've been sort of doing some of my own research and looking, a lot of stuff will be in like forums or like old Facebook pages about old Perth venues and stuff like that. And I found like some mentions of places like, I think it's now, I think the Aberdeen Hotel, but when it was the Red Lion, and a couple other places, I can't remember, like a couple of those sort of places, like bars that were just like regular bars, but were definitely populated by like a lot of gay men, and that the Red Lion used to have drag shows apparently, and like stuff like that.
Another one like that I definitely remember was, and now I think now it's called the Northbridge Hotel, but it used to be called the Royal Standard, and it had like a Royal Standard fly over the top. It was sort of like a symbol to the Queens, you know, come here. But that the Royal Standard was its old name, and that was its true name, and that's. I think it became the Northbridge Hotel, and it was quite close to Hyde Park. Yeah, I definitely remember that one, the Royal Standard. That was great. So that was just a pub, but yes, but it had like a big gay clientele, and there was lesbian clientele used to go there as well, and you know, gays and lesbians used to mix there. That was always good there, and they did have drag shows there, from what I can remember. And there used to be there were these 3 pubs called. There was the Cat, the Dog, and the Crow, right? So that was the Loaded Dog, the Stoned Crow, and the Cat and Fiddle. And the Cat and Fiddle was in Mount Lawley, on Beaufort Street. I don't know what it's called. It's called something else now. And then the Loaded Dog was in it's sort of near where the Court Hotel is. There was a big multi-story car park, and this was in the bottom of the car park. It was like a shop, sort of was in the bottom of the car park, you know. And its claim to fame was that it had the loudest bands in Perth, like absolutely appalling music, but it was really loud. And the Stone Crow was in Fremantle. And so they weren't like gay venues, but they were all gay friendly, you know. And they were only small, so they were like sort of like little English pubs, you know.
Yeah.
They're only small, but they used to be jam-packed full of people. And the whole sort of alternative scene people used to go to those ones. The Dog, the Cat, and the Crow. They were good. So like the Cat and Fiddle, you know, that just used to go off like a frog in a sock, right? But at some point it was bought. And so I can't remember, but it must have been about like 1993 or 94, something like that, right? So it was bought by somebody else. And so they turned it into like, I think it was called like the Typewriter or something. But it was just a trendy bar. But almost instantly, all the people who used to go there when it was the Cat, it was a completely different crowd of people, right? And they just went somewhere else. And the people that came there were like, you know what, they used to call them like the yuppies, you know, with the young, upwardly mobile, young professional types who were moving into Mount Lawley and all those sorts of places. But while they looked cool and everything, but they weren't really alternate, and they weren't that friendly about things, you know. And so the character of a place could change really rapidly overnight, like of a venue, with a change of ownership. And there is a sense of loss when that happens, because you have all these memories of it and what that was like, and which is probably why it sticks in my mind, because that was great. That was a really good place there.